Hello and welcome to Top Story. The leaders of NATO begin a two-day summit today that looks set to highlight the pressures straining the fabric of the alliance. Among the most divisive issues, should NATO agree to give membership action plans to Georgia and Ukraine? Maps are seen as a final step along the path to joining the alliance and are as close to a guarantee of future membership as you can get. US President George W. Bush has pledged unequivocal support to both, saying in Ukraine on Tuesday that the two countries were ready and worthy of welcome into the alliance. Russia, though, has led a fierce campaign to persuade NATO against, warning that their acceptance would place enormous strain on its relationship with the alliance. That seems to have persuaded France and Germany to back off. French Prime Minister François Fillon said on Tuesday that France would not support starting the membership process because it would upset the balance of power between Europe and Russia. NATO, though, is split on the issue. The members of the former Eastern Bloc are almost unanimously in favour. So is this the end of the road for Georgia or Ukraine? Well, joining me now to discuss just that is Mamuka Udava, who's the ambassador of Georgia to France. Thanks very much for being on Top Story.
Thank you.
This must be an enormous disappointment for both Georgia and Ukraine, bearing in mind the diplomatic and military effort that's been put into achieving a membership action plan.
Today and tomorrow, the NATO summit will definitely discuss these issues. First of all, let me emphasize how big is the support about Georgia's NATO membership in the Georgian society. We just voted a couple of months ago for overwhelming 77% of support to get into NATO. And secondly, we should emphasize one fact that all countries, without exception, among NATO allies, do agree that that's the question of when rather than if Georgia and Ukraine will join.
So this is not a definitive no that France and Germany are imposing on NATO?
Not at all. The French and other colleagues are telling us very openly that all along this process they've been supporting Georgia's, Ukraine's, other countries' Euro-Atlantic aspirations, that is to say NATO membership, and there is no veto power from third countries on NATO's decisions, which means basically two things.
But it does rather look as though Russia has a veto here. I mean, George W. Bush said yesterday in Ukraine, no, Russia does not have a veto, but it's on the surface at least, it certainly looks as though France and Germany in particular have reacted to the pressure that Russia has been imposing over the last few months.
Again, this is the question of timing. So some countries are saying that Bucharest may not be the right time for this decision. But overwhelming majority NATO countries, they are on board and they support our aspirations. And we think that if NATO does not decide today, tomorrow in Bucharest, that will not be very good signal sent around, mostly towards Moscow.
Well,
because
the Georgian president called it appeasement. Very strong words.
We think that we should be basing our positions, here we mean NATO as well, NATO countries, positions based on principles. That was the position of NATO, European Union, since 20 years ago after the dissolution of the Soviet and Communist bloc. And this politic has succeeded because we have in Central and Eastern Europe stability, security, which was unimaginable 20 years ago. But this process has not finished yet, so it should continue. It should go forward until we create prosperous, stable, predictable situation in the European East, and Georgia definitely should be included in that process.
It's clear, though, that certain NATO countries feel that Georgia has more to do. In particular, there's a feeling that the fact that there are two unresolved, frozen conflicts in Georgia with Abkhazia and South Ossetia is a big problem for NATO.
We agree, and that is the very reason why we emphasize that the map decision in Bucharest, getting on the track of irreversible NATO path. That means getting official candidate status at the NATO summit will definitely help the processes of conflict resolution, because it will be a very clear signal, mostly directed towards us, but also to Moscow, that their policy of interference in the internal affairs of neighbors cannot last, and NATO countries, European countries, won't tolerate that. So that gives a powerful political momentum for the resolution of these conflicts. If this decision is not taken, then we may face more intransigent position of Russia vis-à-vis these conflicts, and the situation, instability will be still there.
There was a warning to the Georgian government in a way as well, particularly from the German side, is that one of the reasons they were unhappy or uneasy about giving a membership action plan to Georgia was the poor relationship between the Georgian government and the Georgian opposition. They referred to repression of the Georgian opposition. Is the Georgian government prepared to do something about that, to try and get a membership action plan in the future?
No, the main point which was mentioned was still conflicts, and I told you that definitely MAP decision will help us to resolve those conflicts. What concerns democratic transformation process, all nations in NATO, without exception, agree that Georgia, as well as Ukraine, has made huge progress in terms of building democratic, prosperous conditions in the country. And as in many transitional countries, we've had some obstacles, but we have been mature enough to overcome all these issues, and all the reforms and successful outcomes of our reforms are facts. And that is why nobody doubts in NATO that we will join NATO. The question today is how rapidly it will happen.
And that, I'm afraid, is all we have time for today. Thanks to Mamuka Kudava, the ambassador of Georgia to France. Join us again tomorrow for another edition of Top Story. Goodbye.